In 2001, Action Comics number 775 hit store shelves. The issue depicts Superman coming into conflict with a new, more violent generation of heroes in the form of the Elite, most likely a stand-in for Wildstorm's authority, who are willing to go to lengths that the Big Blue Boy Scouts won't, and the public embraces them for it. They represent a shift in the cultural zeitgeist, extending to a real world quickly becoming more cynical. The story, titled What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, asks a question, one that many debate over to this day. In the 21st century, is Superman still relevant? And the story's answer?
Dreams save us. Dreams lift us up and transform us into something better. And on my soul, I swear that until my dream of a world where dignity, honor, and justice are the reality we all share, I'll never stop fighting. Ever.
Yeah, he's relevant. I'll be honest, it's a tired discussion, and considering Big Blue is my favorite character in all of fiction, it should be obvious where I stand on the matter. In the decade between the release of the previous Superman movie and the announcement of the most recent, the comics have remained in print, just as they have been since 1938. If it were truly so difficult to modernize the character, the comics wouldn't have done it already, even if I can't call myself a fan of every attempt. So that isn't what this video is about. There have been plenty of responses to claims of Superman being boring and outdated. Something I've noticed, however, is that many of the responses spend more time attempting to justify the character's existence than actually talking about the character. They put the concept before the character, when there is so much to him beyond that simple premise. But I can see why, because the concept is incredible. The champion of the oppressed, created to do the impossible, give a voice to those without one, and push back against the corrupt elites, from domestic abusers to mine owners and politicians. Even following the emergence of the infamous Comics Code Authority, which made stories of that nature much harder to tell, the Man of Tomorrow endured, going for something more high concept. You had an intergalactic conqueror who literally steals land. Soup's got his own lair, a super family, and friends from the far future inspired by the adventures of Superman in the present day. Where initially he could only leap tall buildings in a single bound, he became so powerful that he could soar through time and space. Not only did it make stories a lot of fun, but you could also argue that this turned out to be a blessing in disguise, as it meant the stories were now highlighting Kal-El's eccentricity, giving way to a theme that has since become the character's foundation: loneliness. You may often hear stupid people and Superman fans alike summarize the character as simply a good person who does good things because doing good things is a good thing. A simple farm boy with a heart of gold. And sure, he doesn't have much of a reason for doing the right thing besides the fact it's right. But I also feel this description can come from a place of ignorance and does the character a disservice. Perhaps he isn't defined by tragedy in the way that others are, but there is an inherent tragedy to the character. As the last son of a dying planet, he didn't just lose his birth parents, he was displaced from his home, and forced to live on a planet where people wouldn't understand him. That immigrant experience is core to who he is. Creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster to some extent lived it as Jewish immigrants. Their surnames were not originally Siegel and Shuster. With this in mind, the backstory makes a lot more sense. There's this really interesting moment in Action Comics 794, set during Superman's adolescence, where Clark is watching a film with his friends Lana Lang and Pete Ross about an alien invasion. As his best buddy, unaware of who Clark really is, cheers on the heroes destroying the stinking aliens. In this packed cinema screening, with his closest friends by his side, Clark somehow feels more alone than ever. The allegory couldn't be more obvious, and it's something members of marginalized groups often feel. When somebody who isn't a part of that community, be it a relative or a friend, offhandedly makes an insensitive comment, or quite a few comments, like Pete goes off on those fictional aliens. Smallville is a place that Clark can call home, even more so than Metropolis, and he had loving parents growing up, but he'd always feel isolated. This is also brilliantly put in Action Comics 500, where Superman describes his adolescence as the loneliness that comes from thinking you're the only one of your kind in the entire universe. For a long time, the only creature Kal-El could relate to was a dog. Add on the fact he has to keep what he can do, and for that matter who he really is, a secret. The version of Clark Kent he presents himself as in Metropolis is an extension of that. It's a disguise designed to blend into a crowd. It's why as Superman he doesn't wear a mask. Kent's glasses are his mask. When he takes them off and says, "This looks like a job for Superman," he is doing what many wish they could do, be they code switching or in the closet. This is all to say that, ideally, a good Superman story should play with ideas we're already familiar with, but heightened to a superhuman scale. That is the concept and that is why it works. But how does it apply to the character's personality? I think a generally held opinion is that Superman is a Boy Scout. I could try to disprove this by pointing to the many instances of the guy kicking ass and breaking rules, beating up prison wardens and the US military. But I'd also like to look at this idea through a different lens, with a quote from Gene Luen Yang in an interview for Entertainment Weekly about the spectacular 3-part miniseries Superman Smashes the Klan. When I was a kid, I was not a huge Superman fan, but as I got older and learned that his creators were children of immigrants just like me, I began to wonder about some of the stuff that was put into Superman. For example, there's that dorkiness where he's a rule follower who always does the right thing. That kind of reminded me of my parents. As a kid, I thought my parents were dorks. I guess most kids think that, but I think there's an added level when your parents are immigrants. My parents were rule followers. They would always try not to make waves and be good citizens. As I got older, I realized there was a little fear behind that. The reason they acted that way is because deep inside, they were worried that if they weren't perfect citizens, then people would question their citizenship. We're seeing that now with all the anti-Asian stuff that's popping up in the news. I think that there's that dynamic with Superman as well. He's an immigrant too, but he comes from somewhere way farther than Asia. Deep inside, I think he has the same fears. When Kal-El wears the red and blue, he is his truest self, doing what he was always meant to do, but even that comes with expectations and worries. He isn't your average American, and he embraces that fact, because the world already reminds him. It reminds him every time he lashes out and isn't a beacon of compassion, so it makes sense that Clark Kent is a mask he chooses to wear. You'd think if Superman is the ultimate expression of his personality, he'd never take the cape off, but to once again quote one of the all-time greatest Superman writers, this time Elliot Magan, "Everybody has a demon, everybody has a hobby, a habit that is a part of his character and he can't break. Superman's is Clark. Kal doesn't need to eat or sleep, but he chooses to. His fortress of solitude is greater than any mansion, but he chooses to live among us. The things humans take for granted are the alien's greatest pleasures, as it is his strongest tether to humanity. Or at least it originally was. In spite of, and because of, our imperfections, the last son of Krypton adores us humans, and there is no human he loves more than Lois Lane. She may have at first paid the meek and mild-mannered Clark Kent little mind, but immediately found herself drawn to the Man of Tomorrow. I've noticed that the consensus has changed slightly. Some may prefer Lois falling for Clark Kent instead, as they think preferring the literal superhero makes her appear shallow. If you ask me, there's a little bit of projection behind such an interpretation, and it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of their relationship. Superman is on this earth to save it, and Lois is here to find the truth in it. Her modern origins depict her as the daughter of a military general. She's seen the way power corrupts firsthand. Superman ought to be another example of that, but he's not. He isn't just kind, handsome, and effortlessly cool, he's sincere. In the face of a guy like this, the city girl's cynicism proves null and void. Clark Kent is not sincere, not at first. It is only once Lois gets a chance to look beyond the glasses that she and Clark take the next step. Once she looks beyond the glasses and toward the Superman hiding behind them, toward the alien desperately searching for a human connection. This is brilliantly conveyed in a story within the Mysteries of Love and Space anthology, which I recommend to anybody who wants to get a good idea of how the Clark and Lois dynamic has developed over the years, but isn't keen on reading a slightly dated and multiple decades old story. It would take up until post-Crisis in the 1990s for Superman and Lois to finally tie the knot, where previously Kal's hesitance to let himself be happy kept the two apart. As Superman, he swore his life to the planet he protects, and as Clark, he refused to let Lois in on his secret, even though she clearly already knew. And this is one of Superman's greatest flaws, which yes, he does have. Some would argue that Superman is hard to write because it's difficult to find conflict for a character so powerful, but any good story will show you that not all conflict has to be physical, though he has many villains who can take advantage of his weaknesses. This is best evident through Lex Luthor, and I'm not referring to his access to kryptonite. Lex is a childhood friend turned arch enemy, an idea from the Silver Age which modern stories such as Superman Birthright have since expanded on. Growing up in Smallville, the two each felt like outsiders, with this being at the heart of their relationship, for better or worse. It's what brought them together, but also what drove them apart. Clark was hesitant to reveal his true self to Lex, out of fear of what might happen, and this cemented Luthor's belief that he would forever be alone, causing him to push Clark away. When they fight, Kal-El can't help but blame himself for the many years of harm Lex has caused, because maybe if he'd just opened up, Lex might have set his sights on saving the world rather than destroying it, and maybe Kal wouldn't have felt so alone. When I say loneliness is Superman's foundation, I mean it. From the concept to the character, from his greatest qualities to his greatest flaws. It's what his mission is built around. He watched his world fall. He still wonders why he lived but millions of others had to die. And he sometimes fears that loss is all he'll ever know. It forced him to live a life of solitude, but it won't happen again. The better tomorrow he fights for is a world where people like him won't have to hide behind a pair of glasses. It's a never-ending battle, but he's seen the future and knows it's a battle worth fighting. There's so much more I could say about this guy, and so much more I would like to say at a later date, but some things you can't put into words, man. So yeah, Superman isn't boring if you treat him like an actual character. And no, he isn't supposed to be old-fashioned and one-note. He has a personality, he's flawed, he likes bondage.